Prime Minister is the most senior Minister of Cabinet in the executive branch of government in a parliamentary system. In many systems, the Prime Minister selects and may dismiss other members of the Cabinet, and allocates posts to members within the government. In most systems, the Prime Minister is the presiding member and chairman of the Cabinet. In a minority of systems, notably in semi-presidential systems of government, a Prime Minister is the official who is appointed to manage the civil service and execute the directives of the head of state. In parliamentary systems fashioned after the Westminster system, the Prime Minister is the presiding and actual head of the government and head of the executive branch. In such systems, the head of state or the head of state's official representative usually holds a largely ceremonial position, although often with reserve powers. The Prime Minister is often, but not always, a member of Parliament and is expected with other ministers to ensure the passage of bills through the legislature. In some monarchies the monarch may also exercise executive powers which are constitutionally vested in the Crown and may be exercised without the approval of Parliament. As well as being head of government, a Prime Minister may have other roles or titles. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, for example, is also First Lord of the Treasury and Minister for the Civil Service. Prime Ministers may take other ministerial posts. For example, during the Second World War, Winston Churchill was also Minister of Defence. Etymology. The first actual usage of the term Prime Minister or Premier Minister was used by Cardinal Richelieu when in 1625 he was named to head the Royal Council as Prime Minister of France. Louis XIV and his descendants generally attempted to avoid giving this title to their chief ministers. The term Prime Minister in the sense that we know it originated in the 18th century in the United Kingdom. History. The monarchs of England and the United Kingdom had ministers in whom they placed special trust and who were regarded as the head of the government. Examples were Thomas Cromwell under Henry VIII. William Cecil, Lord Burghley under Elizabeth I. Clarendon under Charles II and Godolphin under Queen Anne. These ministers held a variety of formal posts, but were commonly known as the Minister, the Chief Minister, the First Minister, and finally the Prime Minister. The power of these ministers depended entirely on the personal favour of the monarch. Although managing the Parliament was among the necessary skills of holding high office, they did not depend on a parliamentary majority for their power. Although there was a cabinet, it was appointed entirely by the monarch, and the monarch usually presided over its meetings. When the monarch grew tired of a first minister, he or she could be dismissed, or worse, Cromwell was executed and Clarendon driven into exile when they lost favour. Kings sometimes divided power equally between two or more ministers to prevent one minister from becoming too powerful. Late in Anne's reign, for example, the Tory ministers Harley and St John shared power. Post-English Civil War. In the mid-17th century, after the English Civil War and the Protectorate, Parliament had strengthened its position and it emerged even more powerful after the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and passage of the Bill of Rights in 1689. The monarch could no longer establish any law or impose any tax without its permission, and thus the House of Commons became a part of the government. It is at this point that the modern style of Prime Minister emerges. This turning point in the evolution of the prime ministership came with the death of Anne in 1714 and the accession of George I to the throne. George spoke no English, spent much of his time at his home in Hanover, and had neither knowledge of, nor interest in, the details of English government. In these circumstances it was inevitable that the king's first minister would become the de facto head of the government. From 1721 this was the Whig politician Robert Walpole, who held office for 21 years. Walpole chaired cabinet meetings, appointed all the other ministers, dispensed the royal patronage and packed the House of Commons with his supporters. Under Walpole, the doctrine of cabinet solidarity developed. Walpole required that no minister other than himself have private dealings with the king, and also that when the cabinet had agreed on a policy, all ministers must defend it in public, or resign. As a later Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, said, "It matters not what we say, gentlemen, so long as we all say the same thing." Walpole always denied that he was Prime Minister, and throughout the 18th century parliamentarians and legal scholars continued to deny that any such position was known to the Constitution. The title was first referred to on government documents during the administration of Benjamin Disraeli but did not appear in the formal British Order of Presidents until 1905. George II and George III made strenuous efforts to reclaim the personal power of the monarch, but the increasing complexity and expense of government meant that a minister who could command the loyalty of the Commons was increasingly necessary. The long tenure of the wartime Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, combined with the mental illness of George III, consolidated the power of the post. The prestige of British institutions in the 19th century and the growth of the British Empire saw the British model of cabinet government, headed by a Prime Minister, widely copied, both in other European countries and in British colonial territories as they developed self-government. In some places alternative titles such as Premier, Chief Minister, First Minister of State, President of the Council, or Chancellor were adopted, but the essentials of the office were the same. By the late 20th century the majority of the world's countries had a Prime Minister or equivalent minister, holding office under either a constitutional monarchy or a ceremonial president. The main exceptions to this system have been the United States and the presidential republics in Latin America modeled on the U.S. system, in which the president directly exercises executive authority. Bahrain's Prime Minister, Sheikh Khalifa bin Salman Al Khalifa has been in the post since 1970, making him the longest-serving non-elected Prime Minister.